Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about David Ireland's play, Cyprus Avenue. So my sense is that next to Ulster American, this is Ireland's second most well-known, most commonly performed play. And again, it's a really, really interesting one. So I quite like David Ireland's plays. I think he has this sort of interesting, sort of neo in-your-face style that I quite enjoy, even though it is very sort of viscerally disturbing in particular moments. I mean, this is a play in which a man named Eric breaks his daughter's neck, shoots his wife, wraps his baby granddaughter in a trash bin, or in a trash bag, a rubbish bag, and then smashes the baby against the wall or the floor, I can't remember exactly, several times until that baby is dead. It's a fucked up play. But again, that in-your-face tradition of people like Martin McDonagh, who's another in-your-face theater person, contemporary in-your-face theater person from the island of Ireland, even though McDonagh is from the Republic and David Ireland is from Northern Ireland, from Belfast. Sarah Kane, people like this, right? This tradition of very graphic violence and sort of working through these issues of psychology, psychopathy, very violent tendencies. And in this play, Cyprus Avenue, that's linked very distinctly to Eric's very definite identity as a hardcore East Belfast Protestant unionist. It's not clear exactly what starts Eric's descent into psychopathy. His daughter, Julie, sorry. There's a Janet in another one of the plays, or somebody mentions a character named Janet somewhere. That name comes from somewhere, and I don't remember. But Julie, his daughter, mentions in passing that he lost several friends during the Troubles, but the Troubles would have ended decades before this play, because, I mean, this is a contemporary play. So that doesn't seem like it's the start of this, or the trigger of this. The closest thing that we have to a trigger is, and it seems like Eric is slightly unbalanced before this, but Julie has a baby named Mary May. And Eric becomes convinced that Mary May is Gerry Adams, leader of at least the Northern Irish Sinn Féin party, a long-term committed Irish Republican who has tenuous connections to the IRA. My sense is, and I don't know a massive amount about Gerry Adams, but my sense is that it's never been sort of officially proven that he was connected to the IRA, but he likely was in some way. And certainly his political activities and his political views align with the objectives of the IRA. And so Gerry Adams, I guess in a slightly perverse way, we might say Gerry Adams is the Ian Paisley of the Irish Republican side in Northern Ireland, right? The Catholic Republican faction that favors unification with the Republic of Ireland. Whereas Ian Paisley was the most sort of visceral and high-profile advocate of Protestantism, unionism, keeping Northern Ireland in the United Kingdom, etc., etc. They were both these sort of iconically hated figures by the other side, and these iconically beloved figures by their own sides. And Gerry Adams has a very distinct look. He has had a very distinct look for decades. He has a very full beard, which was once quite dark black, and has since become more gray. He wears glasses. He has this iconic look. Actually, in the series Bridget and Eamon, the Irish TV series, there's a character named Jimmy who is modeled on Gerry Adams. That's how iconic his appearance is. But Eric becomes convinced that his granddaughter somehow is Gerry Adams. And so he becomes convinced that Fenians, which is... So for me, this is an interesting one, because for me, I never really viewed the term Fenian as particularly derogatory, in part because my main encounters with it as an American were in the American context, in which the Fenian Brotherhood was a movement, an Irish nationalist movement opposed to British rule that attempted very, very unsuccessfully to invade Canada and to launch invasions of Ireland itself. And having grown up in an area with a large Irish Catholic population, my town in Rochester, New York, had a large Irish Catholic population, large Italian Catholic population as well, but that's less relevant for this. I always had quite a positive view of Irish nationalism and the push to reunify Ireland. And I still do. I still think basically Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland should be unified. But that's not what this video is about, really, right? So I never had a very negative view of Fenians, right? Fenians, to me, were a historical movement, and then that establishes a sort of continuity of support for Irish unification and Irish liberation from British colonialism. And that, to me, is no bad thing, necessarily. But for Eric, that is an incredibly bad thing. So the idea that this Fenian, which in Northern Ireland is generally used derogatorily, has infiltrated his home, that his daughter may have slept with Fenians to father her child, etc., becomes the source of this increasing paranoia. And like early on, he takes a black marker and teddy bear glasses from a Build-A-Bear workshop, and he draws a beard on his baby daughter and puts these fake glasses on her to test his theory that she looks like Gerry Adams. And he increasingly becomes divorced from reality. But what's really fascinating about the play, especially in the context of Ireland's other works, particularly Ulster American and Not Now, which are the two that I'm that sort of most focus on this out of the ones that I've read so far. So in Ulster American, Ruth is very definite that she is British, that she is not Irish under any circumstances. And the other two characters assert that she is Irish because she's from Northern Ireland, she's from Belfast. And so because she's from the island of Ireland, she is Irish. The way she looks at it is she is a British citizen, and so she is British. And for her, Irish means Republican. It means someone who supports the unification of Ireland which she very much does not. Eric in Cyprus Avenue is interestingly more complex, while also being more sort of viscerally, violently anti-Irish. And so this is what I find really fascinating, is Cyprus Avenue introduces this complexity. So, I mean, sectarianism is central to David's worldview. But as he descends into madness, there's this long scene, scene 6, in which David has he after drawing a beard on his granddaughter's face, he has been kicked out of his house by his wife, medal for her. And he goes to this bench and just sits and talks to himself for a long, long time. It is a lengthy scene in which he's sort of meditating about his own identity. And he, again, is very, very hardcore Protestant unionist. He claims repeatedly that he doesn't hate Catholics, but everything he says about Catholics is violently stereotypical and really distorted. Like at one point he's telling his therapist that Catholics enjoy having their children sexually abused by priests. So it is this sort of weird thing, right? Where it's like, I don't hate Catholics because I know that it's wrong to hate Catholics as such after the Good Friday Agreement, but I have all of these incredibly negative views of them, right? And interestingly enough, he starts thinking, in this long scene 6, he starts thinking about what it means to be Irish. And he's thinking about this time that he went to London and all of these people. It was a period where the descendants of the Irish diaspora really started identifying as Irish. And so Irish pubs were opening up, people were drinking Guinness by the liter, etc., etc., all of this stuff. St. Patrick's Day parades, all this stuff. Like the most stereotypical, cringy Irish bullshit from Irish diasporic people. And what he sort of finds is that people welcome him into these Irish pubs because he's from Belfast, because he is from the island of Ireland, and they think of him as Irish. And he's very sort of scared and concerned that if they find out that he's a Protestant and a unionist, that things will turn ugly and he will face violence. But he starts having these sort of these different meditations where he starts saying, well, maybe I'm wrong about things. Maybe the whole way that I've been conditioned my entire life to look at my identity is fundamentally wrong or fundamentally too limited in some way, right? So at one point he says, and then I thought, maybe I've always been Irish. Maybe I've been led to believe that I'm British by successive governments of the English crown to further their own nefarious purposes. And throughout the centuries, British governments, as we all know, have been nothing if not nefarious, particularly if it furthers their own purposes. And so that moment of radical doubt, right? And there's another one a little bit further along. He's referring to these English people of Irish descent who identify themselves as Irish. He says, all these Irishmen walking in and out of the pub, every one of them is English. They go to England for 100 years and call themselves Irish, and we go to Ireland for 400 years and call ourselves British. If I'm insane, then I'm clearly not the only one. It's catching. It's catching. Throughout these islands, it's catching. And I think that's super interesting. Because again, that's a kind of doubt that we never ever see in Ulster American. Ruth never entertains this idea. But for me, it makes perfect sense, right? In part because I don't see the identities of Irish and British as mutually exclusive. I mean, to me, the logic of you're a British citizen, Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom, you're a British citizen, you have a British passport, etc., etc., therefore you're British makes perfect sense. At the same time, you're born on the island of Ireland, your ancestors, in many cases for 400 years, going back to the 16th century, were born on the island of Ireland. Your entire identity is shaped by the politics of Ulster, the history of Ulster, this sort of garrison mentality that has only developed in Ulster. Like, it's not a mentality that you find in Scotland, where many Ulster Protestants' ancestors come from, right? No one in Scotland today looks at Catholicism or the push for Irish unification as this existential threat. It's a completely different mentality, right? And so while the mentality of Northern Irish people, I would say both Catholics and Protestants, is very different than the mentality, the history, and the background, the cultural context of people in the Republic of Ireland, it is much more aligned with the experiences of people in the Republic than it is with people in, say, Scotland or England or Wales, right? But it is a distinctly Irish phenomenon, or a Northern Irish phenomenon, if we want to be more explicit. And so I think it's really interesting that we have that doubt introduced in Cyprus Avenue, that questioning of maybe I am Irish, and this sort of question of what it means then to be Irish. And later on, right before he murders her, Eric has this conversation with Julie. And this is the reason that I don't think this is quite as much. So the problem, right, is Eric is actively going insane here. He is about to murder his entire family because he believes that his granddaughter is Gerry Adams somehow, and that his family is keeping secrets from him that betrays the entire foundation of his identity. And so his radical doubts about Northern Irish Protestant unionism are interesting and revelatory, but we need to remember that they come from an extremely unreliable narrator, right? They come from someone whose psyche is actively fragmenting. But he has this conversation with his daughter just before he murders her. And she says, and so what if there is a united Ireland? Big deal. Basically, she makes the claim that nobody in the younger generation cares about politics anymore because politics is dangerous and doesn't solve anything, right? The sectarian violence, the crises of the Troubles, etc., etc. Problem, political problem, nothing positive achieved. And so people avoid it in the interests of getting along with people who hold different political views, different religious views, different historical and cultural background, but who all inhabit the same nation. So she says, and so what if there is a united Ireland? Big deal. And Eric says, big deal, that would make us Irish. Julie says, well, we are Irish anyway. Eric says, who is? Julie says, us. Eric says, me and you? Julie says, everyone. Eric says, everyone where? Julie says, everyone born in Northern Ireland, Protestant or Catholic, whatever. We're Northern Irish. We're Irish. What's the big difference? And so the fact that Julie presents this as a kind of common sense viewpoint, even though she does also say that she hates unionists, or that she hates Republicans. She hates what the IRA did during the Troubles, etc., etc. But the fact that she presents this, yes, we're Northern Irish, therefore we're Irish, get over it kind of mentality, tells me that this play and that David Ireland in this play are working through these identity components, and it's not a simple or straightforward endorsement of a sort of hardcore Garrison mentality, Ulster Protestant unionist perspective. It is a challenging of that perspective, which I find really, really interesting, because I don't know David Ireland's politics. I suspect that he is fairly conservative, probably much more to the right than I am. But I really like his plays nonetheless. I don't suspect we would agree on much politically. But this play, Cyprus Avenue, does raise interesting challenges to that conservative Protestant Northern Irish worldview. In particular, because Eric, then driven by what Julie characterizes as an outdated kind of Garrison mentality, Eric then murders his daughter, his wife, and his granddaughter in that order. And so the fact that he murders his daughter and his granddaughter means that he, on behalf of this very traditional anti-Republican perspective, is literally murdering the symbol of the future, right? Children very, very often in literature represent the future, the possibilities of the future, the potential of the future, etc., etc. And Eric literally puts that future into a rubbish bin, wraps it in a bag, and smashes it. It's hard to imagine a more damning indictment of the psychopathy caused by sectarian antagonisms and hatreds in Northern Ireland.